Welcome, everyone. Today I have Peter King.
Thank you.
He is the professor in the Justice Studies Department. Peter, would you like to talk a little bit about who you are?
Okay, well, I'm licensed as a lawyer in Connecticut and New York, and I practiced law for many years and started teaching for a while, and the school I was at asked me to be an associate dean, and so I became an academic advisor. And then before you know it, I started working as a director of admissions at a graduate school of education, and went from Manhattanville to Fairleigh Dickinson to the new school to NYU, and worked my way up in higher ed administration, and then realized that I really loved teaching. So I decided to send my resume out to all the schools within a half an hour of my house. And Montclair was there, and sent my resume to the deputy chair and didn't hear from her for 6 months. And then one day I got a call saying, "We're desperate for somebody. Can you come in Monday?"
That's the best type of job.
And I said, "Absolutely." And I've been here ever since.
That's great. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Connecticut, and I lived in New York City for many years and went to school in Virginia.
Where in New York City?
Upper East Side.
Okay. I'm from Brooklyn. Right?
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, what do you know?
And I saw that you were also at Brooklyn College. That was one of the first.
Yeah, I taught
positions.
in their paralegal program there.
When did you start getting interested in? I know that you went to college William and Mary, and you majored in biochemistry and philosophy. What made you want to pick that major?
Well, when I was in high school, I wanted to be a doctor, and I did everything that I needed to do to get into William & Mary's pre-med program. So I was actually taking physics and biochemistry and calculus and all the science stuff. And in my junior year of college, I worked at an internship at a hospital. And one of the stints that they had me do, aside from getting woozy in the operating room, I worked for an oncologist. And in those days, back in the Stone Ages, they didn't really know what they were doing. And I started arguing with the nurses about, why are you giving chemotherapy to somebody when you don't know what the impact will be on this patient? Isn't that like treating people like guinea pigs?
What did they say?
And the nurse got frustrated with me, and she said, "You know what, honey? If you're concerned about the ethics of all this, you should go to law school." I went, "That sounds right."
That was what you needed.
And that was the moment.
Right place, right time.
So I was fully ready. I had like an 80% chance of getting into a medical school in those days. And I decided to shift gears. And at the same time, I was taking philosophy classes, and I discovered, much to my amazement, that there's a 100% acceptance rate of philosophy majors into law school.
Really? Oh, that's because it's such an invaluable field. What was something that you took from your philosophy classes at William & Mary?
Well, I started with the basic introductory course and happened to have a professor who was amazing, who was very inspiring and really a genuine philosopher. He was named Jesse Bowl. And he got me interested in the Platonic dialogues and all of the philosophical questions. And then I went from that to studying Immanuel Kant and all of the different branches. But it was ethics really that got my interest.
Now, when you heard of this nurse that told you you should go to law school, what was the next step for you, like to enter law school? Did you know right away? Did you take a few days to kind of let it in? Did you think about it? What was the process?
Well, in my case, I have a lot of family members who are lawyers, and my father was a lawyer.
Great connections.
It was a great connection, and so it really didn't take much for me to realize that that was probably what I should be doing. And then I did a family tree and discovered that in my family, all the men are either entertainers or lawyers.
So you're the entertainer.
Exactly. So I guess it was destiny in my case.
Right.
But the truth of the matter is that I really originally intended to be a doctor. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do by the time I was in the middle of my senior year before I really got serious about applying to law school.
Was there any pressure at all on having to switch? I know that you said it's destiny, but I guess at the time you're 3 years into your biomedical degree.
Well, I had good grades,
Yeah.
and the grades were really what kept the doors open.
Right.
And as it turns out, all of the biochemistry and science made me more attractive to law schools because they're looking for people with different backgrounds.
Right.
So instead of like being, in a tunnel, being a pre-law student, where you're just like everybody else, I was actually different and I stood out.
Do you feel like all of those majors fit into the law school system when you apply? Like you could pick any major then?
Yeah, I think law schools value people who have discipline, organized thinkers. I think the personal statement is a lot more important than you might imagine. It's where you get to show the law school that you can organize your thoughts and structure your arguments clearly, and I think that matters to them.
And this kind of, after college, you started off at Brooklyn College, is that correct?
After college...
well, you went to law school.
Yeah, I went to law school.
And you went to New York Law School.
I went to New York Law School, and then I started practicing and worked as a real estate attorney with a general practice. And again, my interest was to keep my doors open. And so I knew myself, and I knew I'd get bored if I did the same thing all the time. And so a general practice gave me the ability to deal with whatever came in the door. And so I liked representing families because everybody has, this one has this problem, this one has that problem. You have to learn about it and think on your feet.
What's something about family law that most people wouldn't think about?
Well, the really interesting thing about the law is that the areas of law that you think would be interesting to practice in often aren't. And the areas that you think are boring often are the place you want to be. So you should really keep an open mind when thinking about what areas of practice you want to be in. Family law, I found to be full of drama, often heartbreaking drama, and they tend to take it out on the lawyers. If you think about it, people don't go to lawyers unless they've already created problems so difficult that they themselves can't solve their own problems. So when you go to a lawyer and there is a resolution of some sort, typically no one is happy. And at that point they turn on the lawyer and say, you didn't do by me.
So you're kind of like the punching bag.
Yeah, and that's true for all lawyers.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons they get paid so much.
Yeah, you're the punching bag.
Right.
Almost. But it's interesting to think about family law. Would you think that someone that's going into family law should have a counseling background? Or do you think that would benefit somebody that's going into family law?
There are a lot of different angles on family law, and it really depends on what you want to do. There are mediators that act as go-betweens where there's a divorce and you're trying to negotiate a settlement, or there's arbitrators who act like judges but they're outside the legal system. And then there are typical divorce attorneys that are more like advocates, and when you get towards that end of things, empathy is not one of the skills that you particularly need. Whereas if you're more at the beginning stages of the process, you might want to see a social worker. So there are lots of different ways of getting engaged in that field.
Is this something that you learned in New York Law School? Or is this,
No.
This is something that you learn out?
It's something you learn out after you get out.
What's something about going to law school that I guess maybe that you may have struggled with, or something that you kind of had to learn quickly?
Well, I would say the single greatest thing I learned in law school was in my second year, middle of the second year. I remember I was walking up a staircase to the library thinking about how many things I had to do, that I had more items on my task list that had to get done than I had time to do them all in.
What happens then?
And at that moment, I realized, wait a minute, this is all intentional, and they are intentionally giving me more than I can possibly do. And at that point, I realized that you have to prioritize and choose the most important thing to do first. And no matter how much they give you, there really is no such thing as multitasking. You can only do one thing at a time,
right,
and do it well.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to choose what is the most important thing of all the things that you have to do. You have to choose that most important thing first. And learning what that is a skill.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, all of the stress of being a lawyer went away. Because I felt like, well, if I can get to 80, 90% of the things that are really important, then that last 10%,
right,
you could probably postpone, delay, whatever you need to do.
It's not about being the perfect law student.
And you really can't be.
No.
No.
Do you feel like there's a resource in law school that's constantly underutilized?
The faculty. I think that very often students feel disengaged from their faculty. And the truth of the matter is faculty are there because they like students and want to help them. And I think it's a mistake to pretend to be behind a text screen or a computer screen or do things online or keep your distance from the faculty member, because very often the greatest learning is the interpersonal thing.
Do you feel like interpersonal skills are something that are pushed upon in law school? Do you think there's more of a need for that?
I think increasingly this generation is losing their interpersonal skills. I think a lot of students don't know how to just sit down and talk like this.
Conversation.
Yes. And I think that's to this generation's detriment. I think you have to learn how to talk to your client across the desk. Mm-hmm. You have to learn how to talk to judges. You have to learn how to talk to other lawyers. And there's been a trend in the legal profession where lawyers are at each other's throats, where the myth is that, if you're a hired gun and you're a killer, mm-hmm. you're doing right by your client. And as a consequence, the profession has become less civilized. And what we're seeing now is the legal profession is actually writing rules about how you must be civilized. You have to call the other side and give them fair notice. You have to be polite. You can't do this, that, and the other thing and be rude.
Is everyone in all-around agreement with that?
For the most part, except for the bad apples.
Yeah. And I guess they kind of weed themselves out.
Yeah,
in that sense.
And so I think that in the final analysis, if you're going to be a good lawyer, you have to have interpersonal skills and be able to read people in order to, as they say, get to yes. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
To say, and then after that, was you took the bar exam for
mm-hmm.
Connecticut and New York,
mm-hmm.
and then you were at King & King.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was a managing partner with my father, mm-hmm. and he was considered one of the top 2 real estate attorneys in the state of Connecticut. He was the chairman of the bar of the real estate section. So I felt like I got trained by one of the best lawyers in Connecticut. And I'll be forever grateful for that.
Is it interesting working within a family dynamic?
It is. It is.
What's something that most people wouldn't think could happen, but does?
Well, I'm very grateful for that time because he passed away in 1999, and we were working together daily, mm-hmm. and I saw him daily. And I got to see him in a way that wasn't like a father and a son relationship. It was a professional relationship, and I got to see how he really worked. And I think most children don't get an opportunity to really watch their parents at work and grow with them in that setting. So I feel very fortunate for having had that time.
It's almost as if switching to law was a gift that you could use to spend with your father.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the fact of the matter is I had a lot of fun with him. Mm-hmm. It was a good job. I learned a lot. And when he passed away, I looked around and I said to myself, you have to have a partner in the practice of law. And there was nobody I really wanted to be a partner with. There was nobody who sort of measured up to his ability. And I certainly wasn't going to have as much fun. And that was the moment I decided that maybe I'll wind my practice down and move into education and teaching. And that's what I did.
Now, when you were a managing partner, what's kind of the day-to-day like, especially in such a big firm?
Well, the managing partner is responsible for hiring and firing and for the operations of the office and everything else, dealing with the books and records and the business side of the practice. And so on top of your workload where you're dealing with clients, you are also dealing with the other leases and bills and all the other stuff. And I think you really have to have a certain sort of facility for it. If you don't really like doing that, you won't be good at it.
Right.
And you should let somebody else be that.
Of course. 'Cause I'm sure most people that are interested in going, like following that path, a lot of times their drive might be to reach partner, and that's something that they strive for, but they don't really know too much about it. They know that that's something that they just want to strive for.
Right. Well, I was in a two-man law firm, and so when you're a two-man law firm, you're everything.
You're one or the other.
You know, and
King or king.
you know, there are mid-sized law firms and large law firms, and if you want to be a managing partner in a large law firm, you are a partner, and then you're assigned that role.
Is there something that if you were interested in becoming a partner that maybe you should look into or read about or kind of study so that way you can become, you can reach your greatest potential?
Well, as you're saying that, the truth is that in the big firms, there's a thing generally known as the 7-year track, where you get hired as a junior associate or whatever they call you, and you work your way up. And at about 7 years, if they don't offer you a partnership, you're never going to be a partner.
Right.
And at that point, what tends to happen is lawyers will decide to go out on their own and open up a boutique firm or do something else. And so after you graduate from law school, you put in 7 years of work at a firm, and you could wind up not being the senior partner or junior partner in a firm. And you are what you are, and that's it. And if you're happy with that, okay.
Yeah.
But you need to be aware of the fact that there's also the possibility that it won't happen. Yeah. And there are a lot of lawyers that wind up going to other firms at that point. So you just have to be aware of that.
Now, while you were there, was there any type of, mindset building or strategies to just making, working every day, becoming comfortable with the job? Is there any type of advice that you can give to students or individuals that want to pursue that path?
Yeah, you really have to set yourself up for success. Your personal life has to be stable. You can't be dealing with a lot of drama. You either should live alone or with someone you've been with for a long time who's a good support system. The pressures and responsibilities of the law practice are pretty severe, and judges don't really care if your child was up till 3 in the morning and you're tired. So you have to set yourself up so that you can succeed. Your professional responsibilities to your client often come first.
Now, with the pressures of the law field, and everyone knows about how pressuring law is there any stance or future thoughts about that type of pressure and how there could be possible alleviations, or how there could be better communication, or how maybe
which kind of pressure? Where?
Any pressure.
Well, just in general, I would say that
high stakes field.
You need to let your cup runneth over. You have to tend to yourself first and make sure that you're a happy person, and that you love what you do. If you really don't love what you do, it's going to be really hard when you have to stay up till 2 in the morning working on a tax return. It's not a lot of fun.
Right.
So you need to listen to your inner voice and pay attention to it. And if you're unhappy, figure out why. Because that little unhappiness, when all the other pressures fall on you, can sometimes be a crack in a larger structure. So I would say you really have to work from the inside out
Right.
And you're not really good to or for other people until you're good to yourself.
Have you encountered someone that was going through similar issues like you just described?
All the time. The legal profession as a whole is very concerned about lawyers that have addictions, mental health issues, and they are very proactive about making sure that lawyers are given the support systems that they need so that it doesn't flow over into their practice.
Right. Are there any resources that you know of offhand for lawyers or people practicing or interested
Well,
in
the
law?
single most important resource for any lawyer is probably the Bar Association. So the New Jersey Bar Association would be a great place to start. And people who are thinking about being lawyers can join as members, and particularly students. There's a student membership fee, and you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
There are also paralegal associations in New Jersey that you can join where you can get a lot of great practical advice on how to do things.
Right.
You know, when you go to law school, they spend 3 years teaching you how to analyze cases,
Mm-hmm.
and that's it. And so when you graduate from law school, you know how to analyze a case, but you don't know the first thing about how to file a lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of crazy.
Do you think that'll ever kind of carry over into law schools? Will law schools learn more from the field?
Well, there is a trend right now to try to make that third year of law school more practical.
Okay.
So with internships and practicums and clinics and things like that. So when I went to law school, you had 3 years of classroom study. And now that third year is more dedicated towards giving you some experience so that you're not quite as hopeless
Right.
when you graduate.
Exactly. No, I mean,
The
that
theory
makes
is
sense.
that your first employer is going to be the one who trains you on how they want you to do things.
Mm-hmm.
So when they hand you a complaint, they say, here's our model form of complaint, now go sue somebody. You know, you learned in law school how to read the complaint, you know what you're looking at. You don't really know the nuts and bolts of how to do it. It's particularly why I like our paralegal program, because it's a nuts and bolts program that teaches you how to do a real estate closing, how to litigate and file a complaint and answer and do interrogatories. So, you know, if you're thinking about law school, taking a paralegal program is really great prep for law school, because then when you spend 3 months learning about jurisdiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know, if you've never looked at a complaint and don't know what jurisdiction is, what do you care? What? Why are we talking about jurisdiction for 3 months? But if you go to a pre-law program where you are drafting contracts and writing complaints, you know what jurisdiction is for.
So it's best to get that kind of practice earlier on, so that way you're ready.
I think so.
And from what you just described, it sounds like, you know, if your first job is what really makes you as a lawyer, maybe it's best then to find somebody that you respect or someone that you've heard good things about.
Absolutely.
And kind of following that path.
The culture of the office that you're in really matters. In fact, what I've learned is that it's the people that you're with that creates your happiness at work.
Do you see any new trends in office culture?
Well, over the 30 or so years,
Yeah.
what I've watched is lawyers needing to be in suits and ties all the time in a very formal environment to a much more informal environment dress-wise. Then there's the, you know, casual Fridays and Fridays off and working from home, and all of that has changed over the time I've been practicing.
Mm-hmm.
And the current generation is just thinking about it, is used to being very mobile and very informal. And I think at this point we've now gone about as far as we can in that side of the pendulum,
Right.
and it's got to swing back,
Mm-hmm.
because judges really don't care about
Yeah.
texting and things like that.
Texting, and they don't want you to show up
Try,
to the court.
try showing up in a courtroom with a
With a
cell
Hawaiian
phone.
shirt.
Yeah, exactly. It's disrespect.
I can imagine, yeah, especially because law is based on a lot of traditions and,
Right.
and practices
Yeah.
in that sense.
The customs and the norms of ethical behavior are really the social fabric that keeps our legal system together.
Right, exactly. Do you, while you were at King & King, was there anything like a memorable event and that kind of changed your perspective on law?
Well,
I know that's a very general question, but I'm sure there's more than one.
There is more than one. There's two stories. One story has to do with notarization. You know, the whole idea of a notary stems from the scribes of ancient Egypt. And the notary is the one who acknowledges the signature on a document. And as it turns out in legal theory, that if you can't trust the validity of the signature on a document, the entire legal system collapses. And so the notary actually is sort of a cornerstone of the legitimacy of the legal system. So what does the notary say? The notary says that I was there when somebody signed this document. I saw them sign it, and I'm acknowledging that I saw them sign it.
Right.
So I had a really good friend who was a very high-power business person traveling all over the world. He wound up flying somewhere, and he gave somebody a power of attorney to do things for a closing. And he called me up the next day after he left. He said, "Oh, I forgot to sign this one thing. Could you sign it for me?"
That's an ethical situation.
And I said, "Well, the problem is that it has to be notarized, and I can't sign for you, and you have to be present." He said, "But I won't be able to close. I'm going to lose a lot of money, and can't you just do this for me?" And I said, "Absolutely not. I cannot do that, because that would be fraud on the court, and it would be a complete, not only unethical, but I could be disbarred for this."
Say, your reputation's on the line.
Right. And so even with a very close friend, under pressure, I decided that I couldn't do that. And it's that kind of integrity that law schools are looking for. If you heard that story and felt like, "Oh, well, I would sign it, what's the big deal?" You might want to think about another profession.
So you have to be used to those kinds of decisions on a daily basis.
Yeah.
You have to be ready, especially with somebody so close.
Right. So my guard was down, and I was, because he was a good friend, and I knew what my responsibilities were.
And it sounds like sticking to your values is also something that's very important.
Yeah, you do have to know who you are. Definitely. And
were you someone that always knew who you were?
I was not.
And when did you feel like you kind of made that change?
That's a really good question. It happened slowly over time.
It's not something that's just one day you wake up.
No. I remember when I turned 30, I had a birthday party, and I remember thinking to myself, "Gosh, I really don't know who I am."
Yeah, I'm sure many people do that, but it's something that's not talked about enough.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure people can then relate with that and say, "I don't know who I am either."
Yeah, I think the love of good people around you helps you decide who you are. I think the more experiences you have in life, the more you learn about who you are. Like, not notarizing that signature taught me something about myself.
What was it? And you had one more story too.
Oh, well, there was another situation where I was litigating in federal court on an intellectual property case, and I won. And the husband of this husband and wife that were my clients came into my office after the case was over, and he said, "I'm so thankful, thank you, it's great, just give me the check and, I'll be on my way." I said, "Well, I can't really write the check out to you alone. I have to write it out to you and your wife." And he said, "Oh, you don't have to do that, don't worry about it." I said, "No, I really have to write it to you and your wife, because the two of you are who owned the property." And so I wrote it out to both of them, and I gave him the check, and he left. 3 weeks later, I get a phone call from his wife telling me that he left her with his girlfriend, and they're in the Caribbean. And I thought to myself, wow, if I hadn't been alert and paying attention, I would have written a check to him singularly, and now I'd be sued for half of the value of that settlement.
And so that probably saved you a lot of peace of mind from having to deal with all
of that. It did. And so, again, in those split-second moments when you think you're not dealing with an ethical issue, you have to be paying attention all the time. And that's a really important thing. And so when law schools say, we're looking for people with attention to detail, what does that mean? That's what that means.
A lot of people can see that and say that's a very general statement, but when you tie it into that story, it kind of shows the.
I'll tell you another one.
Let's hear it.
I had a contract where the whole dispute revolved around the meaning of one sentence in the paragraph. And if there were a comma, the sentence meant one thing, and without the comma, the sentence meant another thing. And with the comma, that sentence changed not only the meaning of the sentence, but the meaning of the paragraph and the meaning of the entire contract, right? So when you talk about the attention to detail, you're talking about literally every comma, every period. I'll tell you another one. The legal description of a property. It has to be literally every period and dash and little mark has to be identical. Otherwise, it could be something different.
It's the whole thing.
And in fact, if you're comparing two legal descriptions and you see a difference, then you know somebody didn't just photocopy this, they actually retyped it. Now you might have all sorts of problems. So you have to really pay attention to detail.
Now, when you tell me these stories, the first thing that comes to mind is that we're living in a more distracted society.
True.
And then with that in mind, how can one, reach this value of attention?
I'll compare that to you're buying a cell phone, Verizon, right?
Yeah.
And
I have one right here.
Right. And what do? They hand you an iPad, and they show you this big button, and it says click here, and you sit there like a chicken, and you click the button, and you've just signed a 32-page adhesion contract. As far as you know, you could have just signed away the rights to your life.
But that's the idea.
Nobody reads anything.
These terms and conditions pages, and I'm sure you've
Right.
seen them all the time. Who has the time to read 32
Exactly,
pages?
and these companies know it.
But then what can be done about that? What's the next step?
Well, what I do is I scratch on them and I make changes, and the salesperson never sees that I've done that, doesn't care.
You read all 32 pages of this document.
I'll say I agree to nothing, and then I sign it. And it goes through, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But is that
let them sue me?
Eventually, let's say we all start moving towards this Peter King theory of signing contracts. That's something that I'm sure companies will become aware of and change too. But then, I guess my question is, what's the real issue there with that, and how can it be?
The real issue is making sure that you have a level playing field when you're negotiating. The corporations feel like it's take it or leave it. If you don't like it, go somewhere else. But there is nowhere else, right?
Yeah.
And somehow we have to learn how to level the playing field so that these big corporations are responsive to the needs of consumers.
I saw there's actually a website right now that if you look up the company's terms and conditions pages, they'll summarize it for you in like 3 sentences. And so that way you don't have to read through 32 pages.
That's the whole idea behind the Facebook,
all
the privacy
meetings,
things, right? They're constantly trying to simplify that so that you do understand what you're agreeing to.
And I recently just went to Austria too, and one of the big things we learned was the GDPR and how that affects all types of privacy over in Europe.
Absolutely, and Europe is way ahead of us in that regard.
Do you think that's something that the United States will take into
No, the United States is completely myopic, and they're on their own little marching band.
Eventually, people are going to say, why aren't we doing that?
Well, you saw what happened in New Zealand.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Took them 6 days to change their gun regulations after that disaster. Why can't we do that here?
Exactly.
Do you feel safer?
I mean, that's just something I think that the field of law is going to have to start looking into.
Absolutely.
But so from moving on from King and King, that's when you decided that you wanted to move into more of an academic field.
Yeah, I started teaching. Actually, a former partner of mine was teaching a criminal law class, and she couldn't make it that day. And she called me up and said, hey, Peter, I can't teach today. Could you teach my class? I said, what are you talking about? I've never taught a class. I don't know how to do this. She said, oh, don't worry about it. You went to law school. You can talk about anything for 45 minutes.
So you were the law substitute teacher.
Exactly. So I went in and I discovered I loved it. And that's the thing. You have to stay open to experience and try new things. You have to take the risk. Look like a fool. What do you care, really?
Yeah.
So I went in and I discovered I loved it. And the next thing you know, I'm teaching a whole course there.
And then from that day on, like what were your next steps to kind of move into that field?
Well, then the next thing you have to do is always be personable. You have to talk to people, let them know what you need, what you want. And it was through just networking with the other people in that office environment that they said, hey, we're looking for an associate dean. Would you be interested? I said, yeah, absolutely.
This was over at Brooklyn College, right?
No, this was actually, I started at the Berkeley College in New York City. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Was there any reason why you chose that school in particular?
It was close to home.
Close. You said 30
I was living
minutes,
in the
right?
city, yeah.
And so what was that first experience like? Was it something that you...
I worked hard.
Yeah.
They stuck me in a closet,
Mm-hmm.
and I was seeing about 300 students every 3 months. And that's a lot of students to see.
Imagine. Especially getting to know all of them personally.
And the good news is that I was in this little closet with another guy who was also an academic advisor, and we turned out to be best of friends. We had a blast. We used to have so much fun. We would race each other to see how fast we could get the student done.
Yeah. And by the time, that probably made the time fly by.
It did. And that's why I say who you work with is as important as what you're doing.
Was there something at Berkeley that kind of set it apart from the other colleges that you've worked at?
Well, Berkeley was a profit educational organization, and so their motives were entirely different. And I realized very quickly that I was much more of a traditionalist and wanted to be in a traditional nonprofit educational setting. So
Right.
I much prefer Montclair, particularly a state school,
Right.
where the culture here is really about teaching. We really care to give you a high quality education. And I've taught at a number of very good institutions, and I got to tell you, the education here is no better or worse than some of the best schools,
Right.
best, meaning brand name schools that I've been involved with. So
now, it must have been interesting being an advisor, and I remember reading that you were in the admissions department as well, and that was at Brooklyn, that was at Fairleigh Dickinson, that was at the New School, that was at NYU. What were were there a lot of similarities and differences between working in so many different universities?
Well, the first thing you have to realize that in terms of how I became an admissions director, the dean at the Graduate School of Education came to me one day and said, oh my God, the director of admissions just quit unceremoniously. Would you be willing to take over and fill in for a little while?
Right.
I said, what's a little while? She said, well, until I find somebody else.
Yeah.
So again, I wasn't looking for it, but I was open to it, and I decided to try it. And 3 months later, I had a record enrollment, an 8% increase, which is unheard of. And everybody looked at me like, hey, you're really good at this.
I'm like, hey, you know the secret.
So they asked me to do it again, and I did it again. And then before you know it, I was recruited at a grad fair by Fairleigh Dickinson University, and I was given a really good offer to oversee 70 different graduate programs.
What was it, 30 minutes from your house? That's the real question.
No, it's true. That was a lot farther. But it was such a great opportunity for me to learn that I decided to do it.
Now, I'm sure going to all these different universities, I mean, the students have to be a lot different everywhere you go.
Oh, they are.
And then how do you view these students and, kind of work with yourself to kind of adapt to the changing of students and personalities and interests?
Well, the first principle I always live by is always do your best. No matter where you are, no matter who it is that you're dealing with, always do your best. Always give that person everything you have. And so to some extent, it doesn't matter where I am or who I'm helping, because I'm going to do the same thing no matter what.
Right.
But the cultures of schools really do change. One school can be much more about, elite pampered people.
Right.
Another school can be all international students coming from India. There are some places where, for example, they'll recruit a student whose entire community had to gather money up just to get the deposit for the application to apply to the school. That makes a big difference in terms of the kind of culture of the school itself. That student wants to be here,
Right.
you know? And then there are other schools where they're really intellectual and high-end academic.
But how can you adjust to that as the advisor?
It's about learning the people that you're with and what their value systems are. You know, as a lawyer, what you do is you represent other people.
Right.
So it's not what I want to see happen. Ooh, sorry, I just closed the mic.
I think you're good.
It's not what I want to see happen necessarily. It's my best advice as to what's in your best interest. So I have to learn about your value system and what would make you happy, and then go to a judge and say, this is what he wants, right?
It's an interesting skill to pick up. Is that?
It is.
How can somebody that's not in the law field pick that up?
It's about empathy. It's about learning how to put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know specifically how you would do that. I don't think that you can be a good lawyer and be a narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think.
Although there may have been cases.
Yeah, there definitely are. And some of the sort of grandstanding lawyers are definitely like that.
Mm-hmm.
But then the clients tend to be the type that like to be told what to do.
Exactly.
Most people don't like to be told what to do.
That's what I think. But I think a lot of people just
most people know what they
push
want.
It in, yeah. And then they just deal with it.
Right.
But I guess it's kind of just pursuing what you want.
And if they aren't telling you what to do, then you may wind up paying for it down the road because they'll be angry at you and you don't know why.
But then you should be hiring a lawyer.
So it's better to find out what they want up front and give it to them.
Now, I don't know if you've heard the news recently that the admissions scandals.
Oh,
that are
absolutely.
going on. Yeah. Coming from someone that was in admissions, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think my impression is that most of the admissions people are honorable and full of integrity and are doing the right thing. And this was really a case of one bad apple, but I'm realistic, and it's definitely a problem. And I think that what's happened is that the whole drive of capitalism has taken over everything. And so our politics, education, everything is corrupted by this obsession over brand names. And it's not really about the education you're going to get.
Right. It's more or less the
and
status.
So this is a symptom of a larger cause where our motives are being corrupted by money. Mm-hmm. That's what I think. And so, you have the 1%, the 10%, whatever it is, that think that money is all that matters, and that if they bribe somebody and get their kid in, that it's going to be okay. But think about the kid who's now at Yale, who's probably not qualified to be there and is underwater and has to live with the shame of knowing that he's taken someone else's place that did deserve to be there. And are you going to want to live with that for the rest of your life? Are you going to be proud of the fact that you graduated from Yale knowing that your father donated $500,000 to the soccer coach? I don't think so.
Pretty deep.
That's punishment to me.
And do you think that that's the first domino in the bigger scheme of, like you discussed?
I'm sure it's more rampant than we know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's as rampant. I certainly never saw any of that, but I was at the graduate school level, so maybe it's different. I don't know, but
is there anyone in the admissions department that kind of stood out to you, good or bad?
In what regard? You mean the people that I knew?
That you've met, your connections?
Oh yeah. Well, I loved the people that I worked with, and there were some really, really smart people in graduate admissions. The University of Chicago had an admissions advisor who was just one of the smartest people I've known. I'm good friends with the guy who used to be the admissions director at Columbia, who then went on to Harvard, at Harvard Kennedy. Another really brilliant guy. The profession as a whole is really filled with intelligent, well-meaning people.
When was it in your advising career that you decided that you wanted to start teaching?
So I climbed the graduate admissions ladder,
Right.
and worked my way up to a top 10 school. And I got to the point where I either needed to become a dean or do something else. And I didn't want to be a dean. The dean's job is really hard, and it's not suited to my personality.
Being a lawyer?
Different skills.
Yeah, right.
And
no,
you have to know who you are. If you're a dean, you need to either be a real academic, or you need to be a fundraiser.
Right.
And I don't get a lot of emotional satisfaction from being an academic snob. And I also don't really enjoy asking people for money. And so I realized that that was as far as I wanted to go. And what next?
Was that a hard decision for you to make? To kind of to leave and move on to the next step?
No, I knew it was coming. I remember distinctly arguing with the dean that I was working for at the time, saying, you can't keep raising tuition every year by 5-6%. It's just, at some point, you're going to price yourself out of the market, and you're making my job hard, too hard.
Was even that a hard conversation to have?
It was, because most people don't have the courage to speak truth to power. And of course, what happened almost immediately after that, people started looking at college costs and realizing, hey, I may not want to go to law school. I may not want to go to business school. So you really have to think about the money that you're spending and what you're going to get out of it and whether it's worth it to you. And I truly believe that. So if you're going to law school because you think you're going to be rich, that's the wrong reason to go to law school. You know, if you really see the value in getting a legal education and you want to do justice and be part of a system of justice, that's a good reason to go to law school. So you got to figure that out.
Exactly. And so then your next step was to teach.
Yes.
And did you feel that you were ready to become a teacher? Was there anything that you needed to pick up?
Well, all along while I was doing the admissions thing, I was also teaching a class here and there, and I was being an adjunct. So I taught at Brooklyn College, and I taught at a number of other places.
And now you teach here at Montclair State University.
Yeah, and I remember at the time thinking, I really love teaching, and higher ed administration is good money, but it doesn't really satisfy my soul.
Right.
So I said, you know what, I think I'm going to try this full time. And I actively and intentionally moved into that direction. And that's when I sent out my resumes.
How do you find that you best connect with your students?
I care.
At the end of the day.
At the end of the day, I see my job as inspiring people. Because I feel like if I can infect you with my own joy for the topic, then half of my job is done. Because then you will spend the time all on your own, late at night, learning about something, and I don't have to be hanging over you saying, do this, do that.
Right. Because you're not a parent, you're
a
professor.
Right, and I treat my students like they're adults. And I'll say, hey, look, you get out what you put in. I'm going to offer all the opportunities and all the resources. You get to decide what you want to do with it.
Is there a student that sticks out to you that you, I guess maybe a memorable experience while teaching that you feel like you've made a big impact?
Well, my greatest joy is helping people decide that they want to go to law school and helping them do that. I'll help you, tutor you in taking the LSAT. I'll help you figure out about your personal statement and your law school application. And I try to hold their hands all the way through to the admit.
I was reading about the classes that you teach, and one that stood out to me was serial killers.
Well, there again, it was a professor who was on sabbatical, and the department chair came to me and said, you know, I need somebody to teach this class. I know you don't know anything about this, but would you be willing to try this? I was like, sure. I knew nothing about it,
And how was that experience?
Oh, I had a great
I
time.
can imagine.
Oh, it was a lot of fun.
What was someone that sticks out to you the most?
Well, I learned about all the different serial killers and how twisted they are. It's unbelievable.
You probably got to see the legal back of them, getting caught and getting placed.
Yeah, well, the real thing that I learned is just how amazing our law enforcement profession is, how sophisticated it is, how you really are never going to get away with this. They catch you.
If they don't catch you externally, you'll get yourself internally, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of cases where the person disappeared and they never found him, and they think that he either died or was arrested and got sent to jail somewhere else, and we just never made the connection. But for the most part, they are caught.
They are caught.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that you've done in your life that you found was helpful to you reaching further success? Was there any type of habit or maybe wise words, anything that sticks out to you?
Well, my family always teases me that I say there's no time like the present.
Oh, yeah?
If you have something to do, you do it now. And that helps motivate me. Knowing your priorities definitely matters. Mm-hmm. Knowing what to do first. And always doing your best. And treating people the way you want to be treated. You want to put in the effort, and even if you're not getting the benefit of it, if you were, how would you like this to be done? That's how I pursue things. I do put myself in other people's shoes.
What would you tell a student that's not sure about the next step for them to take, whether it's they're in the legal profession or they're not in the legal profession?
I would tell them to talk to people. I would ask for informational interviews. I would network. Mm-hmm. And just start talking. Go to a courtroom and see if you like the environment. Go up to an attorney and say, hey, I just saw you argue that case. Could I talk to you? I'm a student and I'm interested in this. Do you know what? Most of the time people are flattered and will stop everything and talk to you. So don't be shy.
That's amazing. Is there anything that you're doing right now or do you see you're doing in the future? Like, what's your next step?
That's a really good question. I've been thinking about maybe writing a textbook and or starting a podcast.
Really?
Yeah.
What topic for the podcast?
It's going back to the philosophy, really, and talking about the understanding world affairs from a philosophical point of view. So that instead of getting into the day-to-day politics of, who did what to whom, I want to try to go up 20,000 feet and look at the real issues of what's going on, look at things from a historical standpoint, and try to figure out where are we and what do we need to do.
Do you believe history repeats itself?
I think it rhymes. I don't think it repeats itself, but I do think there are lessons to be learned, and that if we don't learn those lessons, we are doomed to repeat them. Mm-hmm. And I do think that you can spare yourself a lot of agony if you pay attention to what's happened in the past. So there is value in that.
Great.
What you're doing here is exactly that, getting other people's experience and history so that other people don't have to recreate the wheel.
That's the goal. And just also to show that, there's not one step that you have to take within your field. A lot of times, many students feel like they're stuck or that they can't, look at other options within their major. And the thing is that I'm sure from a biomedical degree, you didn't think that you'd be telling all these stories,
And yet the science has helped me when I started learning about intellectual property and learning about patents. It's a very scientific part of the law profession. So never be afraid to take whatever you are interested in and apply it to the law. If there's one thing to be said about the legal profession, they call it an umbrella profession, mm-hmm. which means that the law has an impact on every aspect of society. You think of an interest, and there's a lawyer doing that kind of law. If you are interested in dolphins, there's probably an ocean lawyer or a fish lawyer. So you need to be true to yourself, assess yourself, figure out what your interests and values are, and then figure out how you want the law to be a tool for you to pursue those interests. Don't just fit yourself into some legal structure and then get lost. Be yourself, but use the law as a tool.
And also do your best.
do your best.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Oh,
I
you're
really
welcome.
appreciate it.